Hi, we're out on a range today, not our range, but a range, so you may have to put up with gunfire in the background. And what I have is this 20 gauge ammunition that was sent to me by a viewer. He asked me to evaluate it, so here we are. Now this is made by Rio, and the box is labeled Share the Experience, whatever that means. And it's 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch with an advertised velocity of 1,345 feet per second, and it's advertised as having 3/4 ounce of shot. It's also advertised as 3x3, and what that means is it has 9 pellets of number 1 buck. Now what makes this special, for lack of a better term, is that although I have seen a couple of different sizes of buckshot and 20 gauge ammunition, I can say as far as ammo I've seen in the store, it has well over 99% of the time been 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch, 20 pellets of number 3 buck. And so we'll see how this performs as compared to 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch, 20 pellets of number 3 buck. So we'll test it for patterning, for velocity, and its effectiveness. And let's start with patterning. Let's go to the target. So I have my Stoeger double-barreled 20 gauge shotgun with 26-inch barrels. And it's a double barrel, but both barrels are modified choke. And I have a shoot and see target, and I'll shoot this from 20 yards, and let's see what kind of pattern I get. And here's our 9 impacts, one at the very edge of the shoot and see. Now this is a pretty tight pattern. That's impressive. It is low, but that could just be me, or it could be because this gun pattern's low. But we'll paste up these shot holes and try one more shot. And here again we have a good pattern, this time with one flyer, which was not just me. Now the reason these impacts are higher is because I aimed higher. Let's paste up these shot holes and take one more shot. Okay, here's some interesting results. Now this gun does pattern a little low with this ammunition, so this time I aimed right about here expecting to hit in the center, and I did. However, there's 9 pellets. Here's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is what we call the unpredictability of buckshot. As where we saw 2 very good patterns, this pattern was terrible. So let's put up a new target and take one more shot. And we see again 8 pellets in a good pattern and a 9th pellet flyer. Now I've got our shot holes pasted up, and let's see how our Rio number 1 buckshot stacks up against what I would consider to be typical 20 gauge buckshot. So I'm going to use Winchester Super X 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch, 20 pellets of number 3 buckshot. And again, I'll shoot from 20 yards, and let's see how our patterns compare. Now this is 20 pellets. There are 17 on the shoot and see, plus 18, 19, and 20. The first thing we notice is that there's a lot more impacts. Yes, because there's 20 pellets instead of 9. We also see that this pattern is very well centered. That's a good pattern. But also, it's a significantly bigger pattern than what we were getting with the Rio ammunition. Except for the occasional 9th pellet flyer, the Rio ammo really was holding a pretty tight pattern. So let's put up a new target and shoot another shot with a number 3 buck. Now again, 20 pellets. We have 16 on the shoot and see, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So we see a good pattern, a consistent pattern, but still not quite as tight as the pattern we were getting with the Rio ammunition. Now let's see what kind of velocities we get. Typically I set the chronograph up at 7 yards, but when I'm using shotguns with multiple projectile ammunition, for the safety of the chronograph I want to be a little closer, so it's only at 4 yards. And we'll start with our Rio ammunition. 1270, 1321, 1348, 1245. Let's try 2 more shots. $13.15, and 1341. Let's see how that compares to our Winchester ammo. And now our Winchester with number 3 buckshot. 1193. 1223. Now the chronograph just signaled me error 3, so we'll have to turn it off and turn it back on. So give me just a moment to do that. Okay, let's try a couple more shots. 313. Pretty sure that's a malfunction. 40. Wow, that was kind of slow. Well, I crunched the numbers, and it comes with the normal caveats that chronographs don't always agree with each other, and certain environmental factors like ambient temperature and elevation can affect chronograph results. We also have to consider that whatever firearm the Rio people used to get the advertised velocity on this box was probably a different firearm than what I'm using here today. And you saw with the Winchester ammunition, we were getting some chronograph malfunctions. Okay, off camera, we fired a few more shots and finally came up with a couple of numbers we could use. So with that, I crunched the numbers. And with the Winchester ammunition, we got a mean velocity of 1,208. With the Rio ammunition, 1,306. That's 98 feet per second more. That's significantly more. Not only that, this box advertises that it's comfortable to shoot and reduced recoil, and the felt recoil I was getting with the Rio ammunition was significantly less than what I was getting with the Winchester. So greater velocity and less recoil, that's due to the charge of shot being significantly lighter. So, all the way around, Rio ammunition seems to perform pretty well. But how will that translate into effectiveness on the intended target? Well, to test that, we'll use the meat target. Now, for those who are not familiar with it, the meat target is leather couch skin followed by pork chop pectorals, pork ribs, bag of oranges to simulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. And I'll shoot this from 20 yards with our 2 different buckshots and see what kind of effect we get. And we'll start with the Rio ammunition. Given the pattern spread shooting at 20 yards, I shot this target with 3 rounds of the Rio number 1 buckshot, just so we would have enough pellets to get some good data. And what we got was, the ribs on the front of the target have 30 caliber holes in them. Where pellets hit the ribs, shattered them. We had a lot of holes through our orange lung tissue. Not a lot of damage, just 30 caliber holes. The damage was really mediocre. And we have several hits on the ribs on the back of the target, and where pellets hit ribs, broke them. Now, as far as penetration, a couple of the pellets were stopped by the orange lung tissue. 1 pellet was stopped by the ribs on the back of the target. The great majority of pellets were stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target, and a few made it through to about the 6th layer of fleece. Now let's take a close-up look at the pellets I recovered. And here's our Rio pellets, and you can see some of them are deformed a little, some of them a great deal, depending on where they hit. Now we have a new meat target set up, and I'll shoot this from 20 yards with our Winchester number 3 buckshot. Let's see how our results compare. Now with our number 3 buckshot, the first thing we notice is there's a lot more holes in the target because there were a lot more pellets. But in looking at the damage caused by those pellets, the ribs on the front of the target just have 25 caliber holes in them. Where pellets hit ribs, shattered them. But in this case, a couple of the pellets were stopped by the ribs on the front of the target. Now, as far as the damage to our orange lung tissue, we see in a per pellet sense less damage. There's smaller holes through the oranges. However, there's a lot more holes. So the amount of damage seems to be overall more. Now the ribs on the back of the target, we see 25 caliber holes. Where pellets hit ribs, broke them. But again, we see several pellets stopped by the ribs. Some of the pellets really flattened and some fragmented. As far as overall penetration, we still see that the great majority of pellets were stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target. But in this case, none of them actually made it through into the fleece bullet stop. So put this all together, and what we see is less penetration, but not tremendously less. We see in a per pellet sense less damage, but because there's a lot more pellets, overall there's more damage. Now let's take a close-up look at the pellets I recovered. And here's some of our pellets, some of which are pretty well flattened out, and some of them have very little deformation depending on where they hit the target. So the takeaways from all of this. Well, we saw that when compared to your typical 20 gauge buckshot, which is 2 3/4 inch, 20 pellets of number 3 buck, the Rio had significantly higher velocity and, according to my shoulder, significantly less recoil. Okay, there's a couple of big pluses. We also saw that it had a really good pattern, which means more pellets on target at a distance. However, that small pattern is not going to enhance hit probability as much as some other types of shot. So if you saw a target and wanted to get a lot of pellets on it, the Rio is going to do good. But if something were running by and you're trying to hit it, part of the purpose of a shotgun is to have a big pattern to enhance your hit probability. And the Rio is not going to work as well for that as your more typical 20 gauge buckshots would. Now, if I were going to go deer hunting with my 20 gauge shotgun, the Rio would have a couple of big pluses. One of those is, with bigger pellets, you're going to get more penetration. I think it would do more damage in terms of deer hunting. Also, with fewer pellets, there's not going to be as many pellets and pellet fragments I have to pick out of the deer. And a real big one is that in the state in which I reside, if you're going to hunt deer with a shotgun, with buckshot, it has to be number 1 buck or bigger. So number 3 buck, remember, as your numbers get bigger, your shot gets smaller. Number 3 buck would not be legal for me to use to hunt deer in this state. So the number 1 buck of the Rio allows me to hunt deer legally. Again, big plus. Now, in terms of home defense type stuff, we saw the damage to the meat target. The Rio ammunition certainly sufficient, but we saw a little more penetration and more damage in a per pellet sense, but the number 3 buck, because it had so many more pellets, did overall more damage. So in a home defense type thing, with the number 3 buck having overall more damage and a little less penetration, that might be the big plus. So depending on who you are and where you are and what it is you're trying to do, the Rio might be a really good option as opposed to your more conventional, more common 20 gauge buckshots. And it comes down to the bottom line. Is the Rio ammunition the right ammunition for me? Depending on what I'm doing, especially if I were going deer hunting, yes, it's the right ammo for me. If it's the right ammo for you, you be the judge. So as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the Rio number 1 buck 20 gauge video.